the Committee on Homeland Security, Subcommittee on Transportation and Protective Security, and Subcommittee on Emergency Preparedness, Response, and Communications will come to order. The subcommittees are meeting today to examine the degree to which the Department of Homeland Security leverages its research and development expertise to improve the security architecture of our nation's surface transportation systems. Specifically, the subcommittees will examine how the TSA and the Science and Technology Directorate collaborate to improve security capabilities and address identified needs. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. The free movement of goods and people depends on the security of our transportation networks. A substantial number of Americans utilize safe surface transportation on a daily basis, including over 10 billion riders annually on 6,800 U.S. mass transit systems. While TSA is responsible for securing all of America's transportation systems, its approaches to aviation security and surface transportation security are, to say the least, markedly different. Whereas TSA is directly involved in security operations at airports, the agency provides oversight and assistance to surface transportation modes through partnerships with operators as well as state and local authorities. This collaborative, whole-of-the-community approach helps to ensure that resources are applied efficiently and have the highest efficacy in reducing risk to the nation's transportation systems. We know that DHS provides support through security threat assessments, explosives detections canines, nowhere near enough, and security grants. However, our subcommittees hope to learn more today of how S&T, for short for Science and Technology, and TSA are helping to drive security technology innovation for the surface sector. This committee understands that this is a complex undertaking, and I hope we can help you with this critically important responsibility. The current threat environment facing surface transportation is persistent. The 2015 bombing of a railway station in Turkey, the 2016 metro bombing in Belgium, and the 2017 metro bombing in Russia demonstrate that terrorists continue to see surface transportation modes as soft targets which can yield high numbers of casualties. The attempted suicide bombing in the Port Authority bus terminal in New York City last month, a few blocks from where I was standing at the time it happened, followed a recent vehicle ramming attack in Manhattan that killed 8 people. As representative of New York's 24th District in Syracuse, I recognize the importance of securing commuter buses, transit agencies, freight rail, and all modes of surface transportation. That is why I'm so pleased to be working together with my fellow New Yorker, Chairman Donovan, as well as ranking members Watson, Coleman, and Payne, whose New Jersey transportation systems are so closely linked to those in our home state of New York. This hearing continues the committee's efforts to understand the challenges facing the diverse spectrum of surface transportation modes, as well as the bureaucratic hurdles that stymie the development of security technology. Previously, we heard from transit police and law enforcement personnel, surface transportation operators, and industry stakeholders. Their insights have helped us to identify obstacles that contribute to an impractical development timeline. Security regulations, inspections, Viper teams, and grants are only parts of the conversations we should be having on how to properly secure surface transportation. These initiatives must be supplemented by the deployment of innovative security technologies to effectively reduce risk. Based on your experiences and your expertise, I want to know what you all envision as an appropriate balance of security initiatives and technology in the surface transportation environment. More importantly, I want to know how DHS can lead the way to achieve this balance. In recent testimony, TSA Administrator Pekoski said, quote, "Although we have invested significant resources and implemented numerous programs and policies to reduce identified vulnerabilities and minimize potential consequences, in the current climate, vigilance and preparation can only take us so far." End quote. Truer words have not been spoken. While I do believe that vigilance is a critical part of threat mitigation, I also agree with the administrator that TSA must look beyond existing efforts. We need the effective innovation of security technologies to remain proactive against evolving threats. Today, I would like to discuss how we can expand upon DHS and TSA's efforts to ensure that stakeholders have the tools they need to properly secure surface transportation modes. Specifically, how can TSA and S&T better coordinate with each other and with surface transportation stakeholders to streamline the development and deployment of critical security technologies and surface transportation systems. Ms. Proctor, Mr. Pryor, Mr. Roberts, and Mr. Jenkins, thank you all very much for appearing before us today to testify about this timely and important issue. We look forward to hearing your testimony. I am pleased to recognize the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Transportation and Protective Security, the gentle lady from New Jersey, my friend Mrs. Watson-Coleman, for her opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to thank you and Chairman Donovan and Ranking Member Payne for convening today's hearing, and thank you to the panel of witnesses for testifying on this very important topic. Surface transportation systems, which include freight, passenger trains, commuter rail, mass transit, buses, and pipelines, are vital to the economy of the United States. Every day, millions of Americans rely on these transportation systems. An attack against these systems could be devastating, and terrorists have taken note. In recent years, terrorists have targeted surface transportation systems overseas, including attacks in London and Brussels. Last month, the threat to public transit systems hit home as a would-be suicide attacker detonated a pipe bomb near Times Square within the New York City subway system. Luckily, the bomb failed to detonate fully, and the bomber was the only person seriously injured. Nevertheless, the attack proved that the U.S. is not immune to the types of attacks we have witnessed overseas. The ability of lone wolf extremists with little to no training, financial support, or direction to carry out attacks against soft targets demands increased attention and collaboration at all levels of government. Securing such complex, busy transportation systems requires a variety of security measures, including the development and employment of innovative technologies capable of detecting threats without creating congestion. To develop these new technologies, TSA has established test beds with many of the country's largest mass transit and passenger rail agencies to test promising technologies in the field. While these projects may prove useful, it is clear they do not receive the same attention the aviation technology developments receive. TSA's recent biennial strategic 5-year technology investment plan refresh, further referred to by me as refresh, which lays out TSA's plans for investing in security technology, makes no mention of these projects or of surface transportation at all. In addition, unlike in aviation, when these technology pilots deliver effective solutions, TSA does not purchase the equipment for deployment. Instead, it falls to local transportation authorities to pay for these technologies, and many of them cannot afford to do so without federal support. The American Public Transit Association has testified that transit agencies across the United States have identified $6 billion in capital and operational security requirements. We are currently awaiting the President's fiscal year 2019 budget request, but I would note that in the face of this massive need and the frightening threat picture, the President's proposed budget for fiscal year 2018 suggests cutting that little federal support that exists for surface transportation security. The President wants to cut the Transit Security Grant Program, the primary source of federal security funds for most transit agencies, from $88 million to just $48 million. He wants to cut the TSA's Visible Intermodal Prevention and Response Programs, VIPER, which deploys TSA personnel to conduct security operations at transportation venues from 31 teams to just 8. These cuts are reckless. We cannot allow this administration to turn a blind eye to the threats facing our surface transportation systems. That is why I've introduced the Surface Transportation and Public Area Security Act of 2017, which would restore and resource those important activities, as well as provide a comprehensive approach to boosting federal programs aimed at securing these vital systems. Crucially, my bill would authorize $400 million for the Transit Security Grant Program, which would provide a small but significant step in addressing the $16 billion gap in security needs. That funding would allow transit agencies to purchase some of the innovative technologies our witnesses will discuss today. Additionally, my bill would direct TSA's Innovation Task Force to expand its work beyond aviation security and seek technologies with potential to enhance surface transportation security, providing another avenue for testing new technologies. My bill would also direct DHS to report to Congress on emerging security technologies within the surface transportation mode, a necessity since such technologies were left out of TSA's recent report. It is time that we finally give surface transportation security the attention it requires. And I look forward to hearing from our witnesses about the challenges they face and how we can be helpful. Again, I thank my chairman for convening this hearing, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Ms. Watson-Coleman. I now recognize the chairman of the Subcommittee on Emergency Preparedness, Response, and Communications, my friend, Mr. Donovan, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for convening our subcommittees together for this very important hearing. Surface transportation systems serve over 10 billion riders annually. Like me, because I am one of those riders, I take Amtrak back and forth from New York City to Washington every week. These people depend on the reliability and safety of this critical infrastructure, and so does our economy. The open systems, multiple hubs, and lack of screening has made surface transportation systems a target for terrorist organizations and their sympathizers for years. We have seen attacks in Brussels, London, and most recently in New York City. Last December, one such terrorist tried to detonate a suicide bomb in a walkway underneath the Port Authority bus terminal during rush hour. Thankfully, he constructed a faulty IED. However, this attempted terrorist attack is a stark reminder of how vulnerable our surface transportation systems are to terrorist attacks. Surface transportation system operators are continuously looking for innovative technology to help create a multi-layer approach to security. However, this search for technology solutions has been bogged down by numerous obstacles. That is why both of our subcommittees have been extensively looking at how technology can help make our surface transportation systems more secure without impeding their operations. Last November, our subcommittees held a roundtable with surface transportation system operators and heard some of the challenges that they face when trying to integrate new technology into their systems. Specifically, technology that is deemed to be successful in a lab doesn't always work once it's integrated into a mass transit system. Thus, there needs to be a test bed and pilot locations to adequately test new technology. And there's a need for a technology clearinghouse where operators can review impartial assessments of the technology that's available to them. Now it is time for us to hear from the Department of Homeland Security, specifically TSA and S&T, on how they are helping surface transportation operators with research and development, test and evaluation, and other issues surrounding new technology. I'm interested in learning more about how S&T and TSA are working together to ensure our surface transportation operators have the tools and resources they need to keep the riders safe, specifically with regard to technology. I want to also thank all witnesses for their time, their expertise, and what they're doing for our riders on a daily basis, and for this afternoon for being here to share your expertise with us. I look forward to our discussion. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Donovan. I'm very pleased that our two subcommittees are working together to address this very important issue. Before I introduce the next chair of the subcommittee, I want to just caution all the witnesses here. The way the votes are lining up, we may be have to truncate this hearing a little bit. So for the next few minutes, perhaps you can think in your mind how to shorten your opening statements as best you can so we can have more time for questions. And with that, I will now recognize the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Emergency Preparedness, Response, and Communications, Mr. Payne, for an opening statement.
Thank you, and good afternoon. I'd like to thank Chairman Katko and Donovan, as well as Ranking Member Watson-Coleman, for holding today's hearing to assess the Department of Homeland Security's efforts to develop and identify novel surface transportation security technologies. I represent Newark and Jersey City, which are two of the largest cities in the state of New Jersey. Every day, my constituents rely on New Jersey Transit, the PATH train, and Amtrak trains to commute within the tri-state area. 2 years ago, following a horrific attack on the Brussels metro system, I was pleased that my subcommittee held a field hearing in my district to learn more about how the federal government could help prevent a similar incident from happening in the busiest surface transportation corridors in the country. At the hearing, we also considered how first responders coordinate with transit owners and operators to ensure we are prepared if, God forbid, such an attack did occur. We brought together representatives from Transportation Security Administration, the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey Transit, New York City's Metropolitan Transportation Authority, and Amtrak, and had a robust discussion. There were two major takeaways. The vast majority of TSA's resources support securing aviation travel, so the preliminary responsibility for securing surface transportation infrastructure falls on owners and operators. Owners and operators rely on the DHS Transit Security Grant Program funding to install and maintain technology and security operations that keep transit systems secure without jeopardizing passenger flow. These findings were reiterated at the field hearing held in Ms. Watson's district late last year. As ranking member of the Emergency Preparedness Subcommittee, I have fought for the TSGP funding and to ensure that the department's research and development efforts are responsive to the threat environment and needs of transit owners and operators. So when the president released his FY 2018 budget last year, I was troubled to see that he proposed slashing TSGP grants funding by 52%. On top of that, the president's budget proposed to gut the Urban Area Security Initiative and the State Homeland Security Grant Program by over $270 million. DHS suite of grant programs work in concert to make high-risk targets like our surface transit systems more secure. Attempts to cut them in this threat environment reflect a genuine disconnect from reality. As we anticipate the FY 2019 budget proposal, I hope the administration has come to its senses and will request more adequate funding for these important programs. Moreover, I hope that Congress enacts a full year spending bill for FY 2018 so the grant funds are made available to our communities to make surface transportation more secure. Before I close, I'd like to acknowledge that the President's FY 2018 budget also made dramatic cuts to the Science and Technology Directorate. Although much of S&T transportation work was not affected, other programs that could complement its surface transportation efforts were. I implore the administration to submit a responsible budget that recognizes the connectivity between various important S&T research programs. In the meantime, I will continue to support H.R. 4474, Ms. Watson-Coleman's Surface Transportation and Public Area Security Act, which addresses pressing transportation security gaps, and urge my colleagues to do the same. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Payne. Other members of the subcommittee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. We're grateful to have before us this afternoon a distinguished panel here to testify. Let me remind each of the witnesses, as I've alluded to, that we're under a time crunch, number one, and number two, their entire written statement will appear in the record. Our first witness, Ms. Sonia Proctor, serves as a deputy of the Surface Division, the director of the Surface Division within the Transportation Security Administration's Office of Security Policy and Industry Engagement. In this role, she is responsible for developing risk-based security policy in conjunction with stakeholders for surface transportation modes. Prior to this position, Ms. Proctor served as a Deputy Federal Security Director at Ronald Reagan National Airport in Washington, D.C. Ms. Proctor has a long tenure of law enforcement service, beginning with the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department. Ms. Proctor went on to serve as a Chief of Police for the National Amtrak Police Department, developing a new strategic blend of city policing in a passenger railroad environment. Ms. Proctor, thank you very much for your service and for your continuing service to our country and in your current role. I now recognize Ms. Proctor for her opening statement.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Katko, Chairman Donovan, Ranking Member Watson-Coleman, Ranking Member Payne, and distinguished members of the subcommittees. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today about TSA's role in surface transportation security technology. TSA appreciates the continued support of this committee and its members as we carry out our vital security mission. We're grateful for the constructive relationship TSA enjoys with this committee and look forward to our continued work together to ensure the security of our nation's transportation systems. As the Director for the Surface Division within TSA's Office of Security Policy and Industry Engagement, I have the responsibility for overseeing the development of risk-based surface transportation security policies in collaboration with industry operators and other federal agencies to develop and implement those policies. To illustrate the magnitude and importance of the surface transportation system, which is moving people and commodities on a continuous basis, consider that over 11 million passengers daily travel on New York MTA system alone. Every year, more than 10 billion trips are taken on 6,800 U.S. mass transit systems, which range from very small bus-only systems in rural areas to very large multimodal systems like the New York MTA in major cities. Almost 4,000 commercial bus companies travel on the 4 million miles of roadway in the U.S. and on more than 600,000 highway bridges and through 350 tunnels. Those same roads, bridges, and tunnels support the movement of goods throughout the country by 8 million large-capacity commercial trucks. As for our railroads and pipelines, more than 500 individual freight railroads carry essential goods operating on nearly 140,000 miles of track, and 2.5 million miles of pipelines owned and operated by approximately 3,000 private companies transport natural gas, refined petroleum products, and other commercial products. When assessing risk in any particular transportation mode, TSA considers the threat, the vulnerability, and the consequence should an incident occur. TSA takes the threat to surface transportation mode very seriously. Recent terror attacks and plots, like the attempted suicide bombing in the New York City Port Authority bus terminal and the vehicle ramming attack in Manhattan, serve as compelling reminders of the vast challenges of securing a system of systems that is designed to quickly move massive volumes of passengers and commodities. Unlike aviation, where TSA is heavily involved in executing day-to-day security operations, our approach for surface transportation security is different. It is one focused on supporting, collaborating, and partnering with the owners and operators of the systems. The interconnected, varied, and expansive scope of the surface transportation system creates unique security challenges that are best addressed by system owners and operators and federally supported through stakeholder communication, coordination, and collaboration. To that end, TSA focuses its efforts on system assessments, voluntary operator compliance with industry standards, collaborative law enforcement and security operations, accurate and timely exchange of intelligence information, regulatory oversight, and technology expertise. My colleague, Robert Pryor, who is Director for TSA's Intermodal Division within the Office of Requirements and Capabilities Analysis, will further explain through his testimony the work TSA does to assist surface owners and operators identify vulnerabilities and risks in their operations and the role TSA plays in that process. Again, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Proctor. Our second witness, Mr. Robert Pryor, is assigned to the Office of Operational Requirements and Capabilities Analysis at the TSA as a Director of the Intermodal Division. The Intermodal Division supports requirements development and field and laboratory assessments of security technologies for all TSA mission areas except civil aviation passenger screening. Mr. Pryor is a former Marine officer, and his active duty experience included a variety of Fleet Maritime Force Command and specialized counterterrorism assignments. Sir, thank you for your service to our country and your dedication to our country as well. The chair now recognizes Mr. Pryor for his opening statement.
Good afternoon, Chairman Katko and Chairman Donovan, Ranking Member Watson-Coleman, Ranking Member Payne, and distinguished members of the Committee of Homeland Security. And Mr. Katko, congratulations on your son's graduation. That's a notable achievement. I've spent a little time in Fort Benning, and it's not easy.
But it's quite an adventure for him, I got to tell you. He's going to go into Ranger School in June as well, so that'll be even more of an adventure.
Yes, sir, absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you to discuss surface transportation technology initiatives the TSA is working on to assist surface transportation owners and operators protecting our transportation system. Since its creation in 2004, following the Madrid and London attacks, the Intermodal Division has stimulated the marketplace and assessed numerous technologies, ranging from those effective and suitable for person-borne threats to technology that protects critical infrastructure to detection of chemical and biological threats. TSA is also a national leader in providing analysis tools and mitigation means for explosive blast in passenger rail vehicles. TSA continuously researches and develops innovative processes and technologies to increase security without creating undesired financial or operational burdens. And we're all aware that mass transit in particular, riders are particularly sensitive to fare increases, and we keep that in mind. First, TSA helps surface owners and operators identify vulnerabilities and risks in their operations and then works with them to develop and implement risk mitigating solutions to address the vulnerabilities. Next, TSA incorporates the needs and capability gaps of surface transportation owners and operators into our work to influence and stimulate the development of new security technologies in the marketplace. TSA actively follows the advancement of security technologies to assess whether emerging technologies, including from outside the transportation environment, could be applied to address current and evolving threats. Third, and to that end, TSA's Intermodal Division works closely with transportation stakeholders to introduce new technologies and approaches to securing transportation. We establish collaborative operational test beds for different modes of transportation and critical infrastructure protection security technologies to address the incoming threat demonstrated from attacks worldwide. TSA currently has ongoing test beds with 5 of the 10 highest risk mass transit and passenger rail venues, and is now also working with additional public area security partners. TSA also has formal agreements with several freight railroads for technology to protect key rail infrastructure such as bridges, high-risk rail lines in urban areas, and rail yards, as well as with the nation's largest hazardous material pipeline operator. TSA shares the results of its testing with all of the stakeholders and also technology manufacturers to assist them in improving their products. We also serve as the technology surrogate for many smaller transportation authorities that cannot afford or support expensive technology development assessment. As a result of TSA's security technology support efforts, owners and operators can make more informed decisions about funding and acquiring security technologies to meet their operational needs. Thank you very much for the opportunity to testify before you today. I am honored to be here and look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Pryor. Our third witness, Mr. Donald Roberts, serves as a program manager for the Surface Transportation Explosive Threat Detection Program for the Explosives Division within the Homeland Security Advanced Research Projects Agency, Science and Technology Directorate. Mr. Roberts has been with the DHS since 2006. He came there with over 18 years of experience with the Department of Defense, where he managed advanced research, development, test, and evaluation programs. The chair now recognizes Mr. Roberts for his opening statement.
Thank you. Chairman Katko, Donovan, Ranking Members Payne, Watson, Coleman, and distinguished members of the subcommittees, thank you for the opportunity to discuss the Department of Homeland Security Science and Technology Directorate's work in assisting surface transportation agencies, as well as how S&T works collaboratively with the Transportation Security Administration in this area. S&T's Science and Technology Explosive Division enjoys a close working relationship with TSA's Intermodal Division, the Office of Security Policy and Industry Engagement, and with public and private sector partners to address security gaps in the nation's transportation network. The unique challenges of this open system with no fixed checkpoints, extremely high passenger throughput, the need to maintain traveler privacy and physical safety of both the traveling public and system operators, as well as an unalterable existing infrastructure within which technologies for threat detection must fit, necessitates a dedicated program focused specifically on this significant capability gap. The S&T Surface Transportation Program goal is to develop a layered detection system consisting of a suite of sensors capable of identifying person-borne threat items with a high probability of detection and a low probability of false alarm, providing a curb-to-platform layered threat detection system. We are also advancing the state-of-the-art of intelligent video and video analytics tools to improve detection of leave-behind bags and quickly highlighting the surrounding circumstances of how the bag was left to provide actionable situational awareness of a potential threat. These tools are currently in use at the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority Security Operations Center here in D.C., and we're planning to transition the capability to a broader nationwide end-user community through a commercial partnership by 2019. In addition to electronic technology solutions, DHS Science and Technology's Detection Canine program has also undertaken an effort to focus on the person-borne improvised explosive device, or PBIED, detection canine. Canines are the most versatile, mobile, explosive detection tools we have to protect the homeland today, and S&T's PBIED Canine Initiative was created to assess strengths and limits of canines specially trained to detect threats being carried by people either on their persons or in bags, in mass transit and large crowd event venues. This type of parametric study and testing had not previously been undertaken in the global detection canine community. S&T has taken the lead to conduct this type of parametric study, which is critical to understanding the limits of performance for the canine detection teams in these types of search applications. Chairman Donovan, Katko, Ranking Members Payne and Watson Coleman, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you again for your attention to this important mission and for the opportunity to discuss S&T's support to TSA and the surface transportation agencies.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. Our fourth witness is Mr. Brian Michael Jenkins. In his role as Director of the National Transportation Security Center of Excellence at the Mineta Transportation Institute, Mr. Jenkins directs continuing research on protecting surface transportation against terrorist attacks. In 1996, President Clinton appointed Mr. Jenkins to the White House Commission on Aviation Safety and Security. From 1999 to 2000, he served as advisor to the National Commission on Terrorism, and in 2000 was appointed to the U.S. Comptroller General's Advisory Board. Mr. Jenkins is a decorated combat veteran, having served in the 7th Special Forces Group in the Dominican Republic and with the 5th Special Forces Group in Vietnam. Sir, thank you for your extended service to our country, and the chair now recognizes you for your opening statement.
Chairman Katko, Donovan, Ranking Members Watson, Coleman, and Payne, distinguished members of the committee, thank you very much for inviting me to testify. Just yesterday, Homeland Security Secretary Nielsen underscored that America is at war, her words, with jihadist terrorists worldwide who continue to direct, assist, and inspire attacks here in the United States. Let me talk for a minute about the threat. Terrorists see trains, transit systems, and buses as killing fields where most of their attacks are intended to cause large-scale casualties. Over the past 20 years, the Mineta Transportation Institute has maintained a database of what are now more than 5,000 attacks on surface transportation. Let me go to that database and give you some numbers. Since 9/11, there have been nearly 3,000 attacks on surface transportation worldwide, resulting in more than 7,500 deaths. 14 of those attacks resulted in 50 or more fatalities each. If you just take those numbers, the 50 or more incidents, then that gives you something between 6 and 18 airline crashes or full hull losses. In the U.S. alone, since 9/11, there have been 80 jihadist plots against all targets, more than 20 jihadist attacks. Surface transportation was targeted in 2 attacks and in 10 separate terrorist plots. Worldwide, bombings, armed assaults, derailments lead the list of terrorist attacks on surface transportation. Bombings account for 58% of all the attacks and 51% of the fatalities. Armed assaults, 11%, derailments, 8%. In 2017, both al-Qaeda and ISIS encouraged followers to derail trains. This was a long-time ambition of Osama bin Laden. Al-Qaeda went further and provided online advice on how to build a concrete derailment device. We haven't seen any noticeable increase in the number of attempted derailments overall, but just last week, a TGV high-speed train in France hit a concrete block placed on the rail line. It stopped the train. It did not derail the train. The incident's now being investigated. Although strictly speaking not an attack on surface transportation, we do see an increase in vehicular assaults or car rammings. This is becoming a worldwide trend. There were 10 incidents between 1996 and 2013, but the pace has quickened since then. In the 4 years since 2014, there have been 40 such attacks, 20 in 2017 alone. The United States has experienced 6 of these attacks since 2006. An analysis of foiled terrorist plots gives us some indications of how adversaries look at security. They avoid protected targets. They're aware of CCTV. The visible presence of police and other security personnel affects their planning. Over the long run, we can discern deterrent effects. Finally, and this is good news, the See Something, Say Something campaigns work, and the rate of reporting is increasing. Reports of suspicious activity or suspicious objects by alert staff and passengers have resulted in authorities being able to thwart 11% of the attacks and find and disarm 20% of the bombs. That's a significant achievement. We might want to try to explore how we can improve public engagement even more. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jenkins. We appreciate you being here today, and I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questions, or actually, what we're going to do is we're going to go to 3 minutes of questions, and then we're going to have to break very soon for votes, and then we're going to have to come back and get through it. So my question will be very, very brief, I hope. We recently had a hearing on the TSA Strategic 5-Year Technology Investment Plan. The purpose of that plan is to accelerate significant advancements in security technology capabilities and deployment of these systems in the nation's TSA arena. What is starkly lacking from that 5-year plan is any mention of surface transportation anywhere. And so my question to you is, how would you describe TSA's prioritization of surface transportation capability gaps compared to aviation capability gaps? Anyone want to take that?
Yes, sir. I'm the sacrificial technologist today.
Yeah, and I guess the point is, I'm not trying to put anybody on the spot here. To me, it's a glaring omission. I mean, we just had the first attempted suicide bombing of an American train system. And that's a pretty serious thing. And so that the 5-year technology plan is designed to force TSA to look at the advancing technologies. And let me ask you this. Isn't it fair to say that it would be a good idea to have something in the 5-year technology plan regarding surface transportation systems?
Yes, sir. The 5-year technology plan is primarily focused on TSA's procurements through those 5 years. And as mentioned, TSA does not procure technologies directly for surface transportation venues. TSA does have other plans, for example, the National Security Plan, the National Infrastructure Protection Plan, and others that do talk about advancements in technology. As far as prioritization, TSA has many different priorities and has to rank order them according to TSA's understanding of its mission and its threats.
Yeah, well, and I'll just close with this, and I'll move on because I think it's only fair to give my colleagues a chance to ask. But I will note that given the billions, with a B, the billions of passengers per year on American surface transportation systems, to me, it would be a good idea to start including that in part of the plan, because whether we like it or not, it's clear now that that is also a target of the bad guys. And so we should at least have something in there that forces public scrutiny in a more crystallized manner of that system. So with that, I'll recognize my colleague from New Jersey, Ms. Watson-Coleman, for questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First, I'd like to ask for unanimous consent to enter this letter in from the American Public Transportation Association in support of my legislation.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you so much. I'm going to try to get some yes and no's here. And so I'm going to start with Ms. Proctor and anybody else that wants to jump in here. I want to ask about, do you believe that the security grants, the transit security grants program is effective? Do you believe that it is undersourced? Do you think you need more money?
I would say that the security partners that receive the grants would certainly agree
Would
with
certainly
that.
say so. What about the Viper program? Do you think that that is helpful?
The Viper program has been a great asset to our security transportation partners in providing.
So do you support increasing the number of those? Do you think that that's a real link between security and, security?
The presence of Viper teams in surface transportation has true value.
What about the additional canines as security? I'm just so interested in them because I know that this surface transportation issue is just so complex and so diverse that it seems to me that puppies trained are very helpful to keeping our passengers safe.
I'm certainly an advocate of the TSA K9 program.
Yeah.
And believe it has great value in the surface transportation arena. You often see K9s in places like Amtrak
Yes.
and WMATA.
So the answer is basically yes. I'm sorry.
Yes, yes.
So in addition to that, do you think that more law enforcement presence is a good deterrent as well and a good security measure?
More law enforcement presence is
Could I
always
get you
good.
to sign an endorsement to my surface transportation legislation, which hopefully it would be addressed, and this is just a rhetorical question. I'm not going to put you in that position. But it does address those needs that we think that are woefully inadequately addressed by TSA that is doing a yeoman's job in aviation, but leaves a lot to be concerned about with regard to surface transportation. I have a number of questions. I certainly would love to have a conversation with Mr. Jenkins about the fact that we don't have had the experiences that other countries have had, and were there things that they do or can do or technologies that they have that we don't have and don't employ and don't use. But I think my time has run out. But I'd like you to put that in your mind, and if we can't get to that today, you would be able to give that some thought and communicate to us through the chairman.
I think,
that
no, I'm sorry, thank you, Ms. Watson-Coleman. I think we'll have time after votes to revisit that issue.
Okay.
We'll do another round of questioning, so long as time
yield back.
permits. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Donovan.
We only have 2 votes, so we'll be back real quick. So let me ask one question, and then we'll get to the other stuff. Mr. Hawes, I just wanted to ask you, the Surface Transportation Explosive Threat Detection Program was created about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 2011, I believe it was. It was supposed to develop multi-layer detection systems. I was just wondering, have we deployed any of those, and if we have, how many? And if you, at some point, can you provide a list for us?
Yes, sir. The program began with cooperation of our customer component here, the TSA, and it began in basically a survey of the requirements needed. So the first couple of years was assessing whether what the end users needed, what kind of technology would work within their systems in the high throughput open system. It also measured the concern with cost for these systems. And then we developed a requirements pathway and our current technology development roadmap for these systems. So these current systems, we support TSA in developing technology to a developmental test and evaluation stage, proof of principle, and then we hand it off to Bob's mass transit test beds to be able to go through operational testing. So we are still in the proof of principle stage with these multi-layered sensor systems, and so we're not in the operational testing yet. We're in the developmental testing phase.
Mr. Chairman, I yield so we can get up to votes.
Thank you, Mr. Donovan. Chair now recognizes Mr. Payne for questioning.
Thank you. Ms. Proctor, last year there were reports that Australian officials arrested 2 men last year trying to use a improvised chemical dispersion device and to release a toxic chemical and on public transportation. How is TSA working with its partners and offices and components at DHS to help transit owners and operators prevent, detect, and respond to similar threats?
Thank you, Ranking Member. TSA has convened a number of opportunities to share this information with our stakeholders. We provided a classified briefing of that threat to our mass transit and passenger security partners. We have held a workshop, a chemical threat workshop, to talk about some of the technological options that are out there. We did that in December. We have shared information about countermeasures, and we continue to have that discussion with our security partners as we continue to plan training that will help them continue to train their workforce.
Thank you, Mr. Payne. The subcommittee hearing now stands in recess, subject to the call of the chair. And I will caution everyone to please come back quickly right after the votes, and we'll get right back at it. Thank you very much. The hearing is now in session. Thank you for waiting for us on that delay. We got back as quickly as possible. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Higgins, for 3 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll move quickly. Madam, gentlemen, I represent the 3rd District of Louisiana, which is recognized as a hub of industrial growth in the petrochemical industry and oil and gas. Over $120 billion worth of projects either currently producing and under construction and expansion, or moving quickly towards production and under construction. Each of these private endeavor projects have stood up quite extensive security measures within their perimeters. They have excellent teams, including tactical teams from my friends of the Thin Blue Line. They have excellent screening of personnel with drugs and explosives regarding keeping that stuff off of the premises. But I'm concerned about, and I'd like to hear your input on, the rural areas of rail systems, and what are we doing to help secure these rail systems? These products, dangerous chemicals and fuels are leaving these projects, right? Leaving these plants. And they're either shipped by truck or by rail mostly. The truck driver himself becomes a security asset because it's a single unit moving, he's driving it, he's responsible for it, and they accelerate quickly when they've left the security environment of the plant itself. But by rail, the railways, the trains exit very slowly. It takes them a while to get up to speed. So I'm concerned about a time device, an explosive device, or remotely controlled device being placed on a slow-moving train carrying dangerous product through rural areas, because they don't stay in rural areas. They leave the plants, they go through heavily populated areas, and then on to their final destination. So what are we doing to help with that?
Thank you, sir. Technologically wise, and of course Chief Proctor has numbers of operational solutions as well, we're doing 3 general separate things. The first thing, we have a partnership with a major pipeline company. It would be a name you know, sir. I'd prefer not to give it in open session, where we provide infrastructure protection test bed for block valve sites, booster sites. We've also put a small test bed up on the campus of our analysis laboratory, Johns Hopkins Applied Physics up in Maryland, that they can use as a local prototype, and then we export those technologies. So that's the work we're doing, the physical plant. In the case of rail, TSA led an effort numbers of years ago that led to a redesign in tank cars to make them less susceptible to ballistic damage from high-power rifles, 50 cals, those kind of things, as well as the IEDs you mentioned. Those are rapidly coming into service. We also have pretty much pioneered within the U.S. under-vehicle screening systems. S&T collaborated with us, and those systems have actively been used in places like New York and others. So that's a third approach. And then we also have a good understanding of ways that hazmat vehicles could potentially be controlled if a shipper or a truck operator decides that they feel they have a threat. There are modifications that can be made to the vehicle to allow it to be safely disabled without harm to the driver or the public. So
Thank you for that very thorough answer. Mr. Chairman, perhaps the members of the panel that have additional responses to my question could submit their answers in writing. In the interest of time, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Higgins. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Langevin, for 3 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank our witnesses for being here today. Mr. Chairman, as the panelist's testimony has made very clear, countless Americans and American businesses depend on surface transportation every day, highlighting the importance of this hearing this afternoon. So increasingly, surface transportation providers rely on interconnected systems to monitor and control vehicles and supporting infrastructure. Now, with that increased connectivity, though, comes an increased responsibility to protect those systems against things like cyber threats. So recent events, including the ransomware attacks last June that debilitated several shipping and logistics companies, and an incident reported just last week targeting a regional surface transportation provider in Toronto, demonstrate that this threat is real. So my question to start with, Ms. Proctor, in your testimony, you also discussed resources TSA invests to help surface owners and operators identify vulnerabilities and risks in their operations, and to help owners and operators develop risk mitigation solutions. So I want to know, does TSA currently view cybersecurity as a capability gap in surface transportation security?
Thank you so much for that question. Yes, sir. TSA does view cybersecurity as a gap. As you're aware, we have done a number of things to both educate our surface security partners on cybersecurity issues. We've developed tools for their use. We've developed a cybersecurity toolkit. We have started a number of cybersecurity workshops. We delivered 4 of those in fiscal year 17. We have started a series of 6 in this fiscal year. And our focus in those is, those are focused on the non-technical issues, which end up really creating a lot of the problems with things like ransomware and phishing attacks. So in those workshops, we're focused on 5 things that they can do in their company. We call it 5 and 5. 5 things you can do in 5 days that raise the cybersecurity bar in your company. When there are cyber-related incidents, we distribute cybersecurity awareness messages to our security partners to identify the threat and to encourage them to take certain steps so that they might be able to thwart future attempts. We work very closely with ICS CERT. We've worked very closely with them in developing, for instance, our pipeline security guidelines because of the significance of cyber in the control of the nation's pipeline. So we have partnered with those that we realize are the recognized experts there in ICS CERT, and we bring that knowledge to our surface security partners.
When you say pipeline, does that include things like the supply chain?
Yes, sir.
Okay, very good. If I could also, in your testimony, you described TSA's role in supporting the accurate and timely exchange of intelligence information with surface transportation owners and operators. So how does TSA monitor and share relevant intelligence about cybersecurity threats to the owners and operators of surface transportation systems?
We provide briefings to our surface security partners. When appropriate, we provide classified information to those cleared partners, but we provide that information through both teleconferences, through our cybersecurity awareness messages, and through our work with ICS CERT.
Very good. Okay. Thank you. I know I've gone over my time, but I'll have some other questions that I'll submit for the record. But I want to thank our panel, and with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Landron. I'll note that we're probably going to do a second round of 3 minutes of questions if you want to stick around. We're happy to do so. The chair now recognizes a gentleman from Florida, Mr. Rutherford, for 3 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Jenkins, in Mr. Roberts' testimony, he noted, and I quote, "Public safety officials have little to no capability to detect threats being carried into surface transportation venues and must rely on intelligence reports before an attack." You had some really good information, I think, about the types of attacks that have taken place against surface transportation. 77% of all attacks are bombings, armed assaults, or derailments, and then you went on to break that down. That's pretty good intel. Has there been any kind of work with TSA to see the nature of those attacks and then how we may be able to respond to those besides the intelligence gathering that Mr. Roberts correctly pointed out is necessary?
The answer is yes. In fact, we maintain that database to support TSA. So we update the database every 15 days. TSA personnel and their intelligence and folks and their analytical folks have the password that gives them direct access to the database. It's not available publicly because the database itself simply doesn't record the incident. It's a very detailed database that records, for example, if we're talking about explosives, method of delivery, method of concealment, type of explosives, and so on. And TSA uses that to support their own analysis, and it supports, of course, at the same time, our separate reporting. And those reports go to TSA, and they go to the operators.
Okay, and I understand, Ms. Proctor, that TSA is doing some work with stakeholders to get feedback on some testing and technology. Can you talk about any development of technology as a result of the information that's been provided, the kind of information that Mr. Jenkins is talking about? Are we utilizing that at Orca, or how?
I would defer
Mr.
to
Pryor?
Mr. Pryor
Okay.
on that question.
Yes, sir. Our annual work plans and spend plans rest on several fundamental analyses. One, of course, is threat and risk. Mr. Jenkins' information is always very helpful for us. Another one is on capability gaps provided by our industry partners. We have an annual process where those are developed. And then the third is national laws, 9/11 Act, national plans, and those sorts of things. So risk is an important component of how we determine our work each year.
Thank you, sir. My time has run out. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Rutherford. I have two quick questions. First one is something that I've become aware of. It's a little off track here, a little bit, but not much. I'm become aware of the fact that it seems more and more that some train companies that haul hazardous materials will oftentimes park those hazardous materials, sometimes for days on end, outside a secure area. And I'd like to hear if that is a growing concern amongst all of you, and whether that's an area of inquiry that we should get into, and whether or not you have concerns. Any of you?
Mr. Chairman, the regulation requires that hazmat material on freight rail trains be maintained in a secure area. So they should not be left unattended in an area that's not considered secure. That is a requirement that they be in a secure area and maintained until they're transferred.
I'm aware what the regulations are, but I guess I'm asking, are you aware of instances where that's happening more lately? That seems like this term single tracking comes to mind, where some companies engage in that, and therefore they're sometimes storing things outside of the secure area when they shouldn't be. Has that become an issue, or is it something that is not a big issue in your mind? Any of you? Anybody?
Sir, that's not been something that's been brought to our attention. To the contrary, our surface inspectors report an extremely high rate of compliance on that. So we've not had reports of that.
Okay. And in a related matter, like when you go through the cities, well, I'll withdraw that. Let me go change gears back to more germane question here. There seems to be pervasive, not just with TSA, but with Homeland Security as a whole, a prolonged technology development process, and sometimes by the time the technology gets to the front lines, it's already antiquated or on the way to being antiquated. And I would like to know from all you all, if there's any changes that can be made to the TSIF or the testing facility that would help in that alleviate that process, because there's a perceived bottleneck there. Is there things we could do with TSIF that might help that process? Anybody?
Yes, sir. TSIF is not a primary test venue for surface transportation. its focus is primarily on passenger air. Because we're outwardly facing, we have a very adroit and high-speed process where we can induct products from industry, get them tested, and if they're operation effective and suitable, put them in the field. That's one of the hallmarks of our program, and we do that through our relationships with many different laboratories and centers. As I mentioned, our test lab is applied physics, but we also have relationships with Navy EOD, numbers of DOD agencies, Department of Energies, and others that allow us to leverage their developments to get things in the field for prototyping very quickly.
Why aren't they doing it on the aviation side? Do you have any idea?
Procurement is, of course, managed by the federal acquisition regulations and other requirements, and the degree of rigor leading to a procurement often requires a significant amount of testing, particularly for passenger air. It's just in a different environment than the one we operate in, where we have a great deal more flexibility in how we bring things to the field.
All right, thank you very much, very helpful. I now recognize the gentlewoman from New Jersey, Ms. Watson-Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Jenkins, I would like to have a conversation with you a little bit here. I'm really concerned about the recent trend of terrorists to use trucks or cars or whatever, like in New York and like in Charlottesville. And I'm just wondering, these attacks of these lone wolves, low financing, low planning, low everything. Is there anything that we should be doing, could be doing, that would make sense from a security perspective?
In terms of solving the problem as a security issue, I mean, it's limited. The fact is that in cities, thousands, tens of thousands, millions of people live in close proximity, in some cases only inches away from thousands of vehicles, and without completely reconfiguring our urban landscape, we're not going to be able to create effective barriers throughout. We just have to be realistic about that. Things that are being explored, I mean, everything from putting in place some barriers to protection of venues for certain periods of time, that can be done. Looking far out as we move toward more autonomous vehicles, then that may provide some solution in that they can be programmed not to do that. But of course, that raises other kinds of cyber vulnerabilities. So this is one that we're simply going to be living with and struggling with. And as I said, I'm afraid because, as you have correctly pointed out, it is so easy to do that this is becoming a trend.
So we've been, thank you, we've been a bit more fortunate than places in Europe and otherwise as it relates to attacks on surface transportation. I'm wondering, do you know of any lessons that they've learned, any technologies they employ, any best practices that they employ, having had these experiences, that we could be benefiting from if we had the resources? And is that kind of sharing happening?
First of all, there is coordination between what TSA does in terms of surface transportation, and a great deal of liaison goes on between the other entities abroad, especially with the British, in terms of what they do for securing surface transportation. So there's a lot of exchange going on already. In some cases, they have different approaches. For example, in France and in Belgium, either in response to intelligence or in response to a terrorist event, they will literally flood the transportation system with thousands of individuals drawn from the gendarmerie and drawn from the military, simply to augment security.
But this is related to intelligence, advanced information, and
Or an actual attack,
So
and that's not an approach that we
actually
normally take.
We actually still haven't gotten to the other question that I had that I just want to put on the table, and that is, are there any is there any technology that you see being employed in places that have had these experiences much more than us that would be helpful here? And I would just be happy if you would send that information to me. And with that, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Watson-Coleman. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York for questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Pryor, I think during the chairman's question, you said that you're able to quickly deploy security measures that have been tested and get them out in the field as quickly as possible. During your testimony earlier, Mr. Roberts, it's been 7 years now since the multi-layer detection has been authorized, has been in progress, yet 7 years later, we have nothing in the field. Can you explain to me what the obstacles are, and if so, what could be done about overcoming them? And the other part of my question would be, I suspect in those 7 years, our enemies, the people who are threatening our passengers, our riders, have changed their modes and their methods. And so we may be testing things that in 2011, 2012, 2013 were their modes and methods. But now, 6, 7 years later, those have changed, and maybe we were testing things that are obsolete now.
Yes, sir. One of the things about the modes and methods, I answer that portion first, is that with Mr. Jenkins' report and with our international partners, we're aware of what the evolving threats are. So our design points for our technology are still relevant and realistic. As far as the 7 years piece, as I mentioned before, the first part of our program was standing up from nothing. We, along with our component customers, TSA, and our stakeholders, gathered and understood what the requirements were, what their priorities were. So what we did in addition to that is assess what was available as far as technology to stop this potential threat in an open system, high throughput, not interfering with existing infrastructure, those kind of things. And it was, we reviewed what was available in DOD and national laboratories, and Mr. Pryor's program tested and evaluated some of that. My program also did the same thing, the S&T program. So we started with the first piece of the program, just understanding where we needed to go and frame out the technology development pathway to set the requirements for our partners with the expertise. So really, where we are now and driving the technology development for our end goals started 2013-14, but it is the testing and evaluation, it's not obsolete. It is designed with our end users in mind. That's one of the reasons we're being successful in our technology development pathway is we're involving our component customers as well as the stakeholders in the design process.
Even if that's true that it began in 2013, 2014, that's still 4 or 5 years ago. Do we have any expectations of getting anything in the field in the near future?
Sir, one part of your answer is that S&T and TSA occupy two separate parts of the mission space. S&T's job is to push the boundaries of technology, provide evolving technologies. TSA's part of the mission space is to take more advanced technologies, prototypes, things will be entering in the marketplace soon, induct them, test them, give manufacturers improvements. So it's a continuum. S&T will work for a few years, 3 or 4 or 5, to advance technology while we're operating in the marketplace, and then when their technologies are mature enough, they'll transition them to us to actually assess.
But none of the items that they've, and I'm not criticizing their work, I'm just trying to figure out why it's such a long period of time. The things that they've tested, the technology that they have either proven to be workable or not workable, is still not in the field. It still hasn't been passed over to you to put in the field yet. Am I understanding that correctly?
Well, the program was framed out in near, mid, and far-term goals. Our near goals were video analytics to help these guys do that are deployed currently, the FOVIA tool at the Washington Metropolitan Area Center. So our near-term objectives and deliverables, the low-hanging fruit, for lack of a better word, is deployed now into the developmental testing realm and is near-term with our operators. The mid-term is automated detection of leave-behind bags. That's the near-term. The farther term is the harder problem, detecting threats being brought in, either worn or carried in a high-throughput open system. These are the longer-term goals as we establish the program, and they are about 3 to 5 years. Technology of this magnitude and for this hard problem is a long development timeline.
3 to 5 years, is that 3 to 5 years from the beginning or 3 to 5 years from now?
Say 3 to 5 years from now.
Okay. Thank you. I'm way over my time, Mr. Chairman. Apologize.
Not at all. Well, that concludes the hearing, and I want to thank the witnesses for their thoughtful testimony and for discussing how TSA and SNT collaborate to address the unique security threats facing transit systems. You, to say the least, you're an impressive panel, and you all have very impressive backgrounds. We all thank you for your things you do to help keep this country safe. I think in this time of increased threats, and we all know about them, and we get briefed on a regular basis, and we see them on TV. And the fact that we had the first attempted suicide bombing of a railway facility in the United States is a sober reminder of the ever-evolving threat. So we need to be ever vigilant. We need to continue to work together. We continue to need to conduct robust oversight of what you are doing, but we definitely need to get your information. It's impressive how much better the rail side is than the aviation side is about getting technology to the front lines. And even on your side, it's still difficult given some of the hurdles you need to go through. So we're constantly trying to get past those hurdles to make sure that we give the frontline folks all the tools they have we have at our disposal. And there's nothing more frustrating than seeing somebody with a good idea, and that good idea never gets to front lines because of bureaucratic nonsense. And that's something we're constantly fighting against. So thank you all very much. You helped us, and you helped us advance that cause. Members of the committee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we will ask you to respond to these in writing. Pursuant to Committee Rule 7D, the hearing record will be held open for 10 days, and without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned. Thank you all.